there was an even more glorious civilization. Plato called it Atlantis. You think that existed?
Well, the story of Plato's Atlantis should not be taken out of context. Plato's Atlantis is a flood story, and therefore it should be taken into account with the roughly 200 other flood stories that are found from all around the world. To separate the Atlantis story from that, as my critics tend to do, is a mistake. We have another flood tradition here. Furthermore, there is a solid basis for that flood tradition in ancient Egypt. Plato said he got the story through Solon, who had visited Egypt in 600 BC and had been told the story of Atlantis by a priest in a particular temple, the Temple of Neith at Sais in the Delta. Interestingly enough, there's a temple of Horus at Edfu in Upper Egypt, which contains in full detail a description of a homeland of the primeval ones, an island which was destroyed in a gigantic flood, of which there were survivors, including, once again, 7 sages. Some of them came to Egypt, settled in Egypt, and created what are called primeval mounds that were built up and down the whole length of Upper and Lower Egypt, which were to be the sites of all future temples and pyramids. Now, that particular temple is Ptolemaic. In other words, it's younger than Plato. So one could say maybe they got the story from Plato rather than the other way around, except that that temple encodes the archives of the previous temple that stood on that site, which in turn encode the archives of the previous temple going back to pre-dynastic times. The language in that temple is Middle Egyptian, it's not Ptolemaic. That temple is yet another manifestation of a global tradition in ancient Egypt, much of which has been lost.
But here's what your critics say. They say, all right, okay, interesting theory, very well researched as always.
Can I just say one other thing? It's really important, the critics on this, read the new complete translation of the Edfu building texts by the German Edfu project, because they've been translated completely into German.
How long are they?
How long are they? You're looking at 4 or 5 volumes.
Have you read them?
Massive. Yes, I have.
The whole lot?
No, I haven't, because I don't read German. But I've had help of a German-speaking colleague to look at key aspects of the text, because when I first worked on the Edfu texts, I used a partial translation that was done back in the 1960s.
Well, when was that text written?
Which text? The one I read.
The one you're talking about.
Sorry, do you mean the Edfu building text, or do you mean the...
Well, the German version that you're talking about.
The Edfu building texts were partially translated by Eve Elizabeth Raymond back in the 1960s in a book called The Mythical Origins of the Egyptian Temple. I used that as the basis for my inquiry into the meaning of the Edfu building texts. Then I discovered, and it only happened in the last 3 years, that a complete translation was underway and was finally finished. The question to me was, did that translation contradict the earlier translation, or did it support it? And I'm completely satisfied that it supports the earlier translation.
Which means what?
Which means that at least Plato wasn't lying when he said there was an Egyptian origin to this story. And then when we set the Atlantis tradition in context of global flood myths, all of which seem to carry very much the same notion of a golden age that's ended, incurs the anger of the gods, is ended...
Right, so here's my point I'm going to make to you, which is what the critics say, which is that archaeologists are not the only people who examine the past. We agree on that,
yeah,
right?
We do.
Geologists, obviously, this is their speciality. And their argument against you is that if there had been an ancient super-civilization that we have no knowledge of...
I deny super-civilization. I've never said a super-civilization.
What would you call it?
I'm talking
Atlantis is a super-civilization.
I'm talking about a civilization like every other during the Ice Age that emerged out of shamanism, but that went further in some directions than some. I'm not saying they built huge temples and columns and pillars and that they had steam engines or that they had spaceships. I think that they had a very simple basic technology, but they had an incredibly advanced knowledge of astronomy and they had an incredibly advanced knowledge of the world.
Okay, so
they could encode accurate relative longitudes on maps.
But here's the key question. Why, in that case, have geologists been unable to find any evidence of heavy metals, of manufacturing byproducts from the manufacturing of that time? Why have astrophysicists not been able to pick up echoes of their radio chatter? Why have geneticists not found widespread anomalies in the human genome? Why has none of that happened, if your theory is right?
I don't think small groups of 7 or so people settling in a particular neighbourhood would leave a powerful genetic trace, actually. They would leave a trace in ideas.
So you think that all around the world, or a special...
Well, I know that Easter Island has 7 sages. I know that Mesopotamia has 7 sages. I know that Egypt has...
But they could all just be totally fantastical, mythical people.
They could be, and that's precisely what my critics say, but that's what I'm here for.
Yes.
I'm here to
By the way, I kind of admire that, I do. It's, you know, my initial thing was to kind of laugh at it. And then I thought, well, actually, the whole point of science and history and all these things is to challenge perceived wisdom. Otherwise, how do we evolve and learn more?
And hopefully to do so in an intelligent and thoroughly worked out way.
But yours is a logical mind, but it's applied to a lack of facts. Would that be fair?
Yes, it's just as archaeologists are logical people, and their work is applied to lack of facts as well. I mean, they've only excavated, 5% or less of the world's surface. There's huge areas that are completely unknown. The Sahara Desert is almost completely unexcavated. The Amazon rainforest, where in our show we've been finding evidence of highly advanced cultures, which were previously completely unsuspected in the Amazon rainforest. Indeed, populations of millions, cities in the Amazon rainforest. My feeling is that the further we go into this, we are likely to find more and more evidence which disturbs the existing picture. And I've been trying for the last 30 years to put forward pieces of the puzzle that I do not feel are explained by mainstream archaeology and that are worthy of consideration.
So when people
as to geologists, by the way.
Right, so when people call you a crank, what do you say to them?
They're welcome to call me whatever they want.
But what do you feel about that?
Of course, it's not nice to be called a crank. Why would one welcome that? Especially when I take my work seriously, when it's my passion, when it's everything that I do.
What do you really want to achieve? What is the goal?
Most of all, what I would like to achieve is for archaeologists to engage with my work without smearing me, without calling me a racist and a white supremacist and a misogynist and an anti-Semite. All of these words were applied to me in the Society for American Archaeology open letter to Netflix, trying to persuade Netflix to classify my work as science fiction. They used all of these.
Why have they called you these things?
There's no basis in the series for that at all. And the only basis there is that I reported indigenous myths from the Americas, which talked about bearded, white-skinned people coming to America. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of Mexico, is a classic example, which talked about people with white skin coming to the Americas in the distant past and bringing knowledge and civilization with them. Those are indigenous myths. Woke archaeologists have tried to reinterpret them recently and say, they were all made up by the Spanish. To me, that is a racist assertion, that the people of the country were themselves so stupid that ideas introduced by the Spanish would be fully accepted by them as fact within 30 or 40 years.
How do you think we all got here?
We all got on planet Earth?
Yeah. How do you think it all started?
I think it all started with very small bacteria and the laws of evolution applied.
And what was there before the bacteria?
A primeval soup, according to science.
What's that?
Who knows? But here's the if you want to go that route, the Earth supposedly was formed about 4.5 billion years ago, 4,500 million years ago. It supposedly was not cool enough to support life until about 4 billion years ago. But then by 3.9 billion years ago, the planet is seething with bacterial life. And the mainstream argument is that bacterial life just evolved by accidental bumping together of molecules.
Do you believe that?
I don't. I go with Francis Crick on that, surprisingly, because as you know, Francis Crick won the Nobel Prize for the double helix structure.
I'm very aware of his work.
And he did not, in a less-known book by Francis Crick called Life Itself that was published in 1981, he looked into the plausibility of what he called directed panspermia. He felt that it was impossible for life to have evolved accidentally on Earth, for the DNA-RNA system to have just appeared by accident. He thinks it was sent to planet Earth. He speculated, this is not me, this is Francis Crick. He speculated that there must have been some gigantic civilization in some far-off part of the universe.
And a bit of it came to...
No, they discovered that they were going... This is Crick. They discovered that they were going to be wiped out in a supernova explosion. That's the suggestion. They looked for ways to get themselves off the planet. Distances are too great. They settled on cryogenic freezing of bacteria. They encoded DNA into those bacteria and they fired them off into the universe in all directions. And one of those spaceships landed on the early Earth 3.9 billion years ago. And I must repeat, this is not Graham Hancock. This is Francis Crick, won the Nobel Prize.
Yes.
And this is his book, Life Itself, published in 1981. Directed panspermia.
I mean, look, I used to love Star Trek when I was a kid.
He made the point that the universe is more than 13 billion years old.
Yeah.
And there's time for life to have evolved.
No, I get all that.
Once.
But my question for all people like Richard Dawkins, I've interviewed everyone on this subject you can imagine, is, well, what was there before nothing? And because the human brain can't comprehend that, and can't answer that question. I'm a religious person. I believe in God. I was raised a Catholic. And the reason that I have stayed that way is because to me it makes perfect sense. It's logical that there must be a supernatural entity out there which is more sophisticated than the human brain, because we cannot answer that simple question. What was there before nothing?
We certainly can't.
Right?
What was there before the Big Bang?
Nobody
So
because they can't answer
it is
that
a strong
question.
argument for a creator of some sort. Whether that entity is supernatural or whether supernatural is simply natural that we haven't yet understood is another.
Are you religious
question.
or not?
I was brought up as a Christian. I abandoned Christianity in my early 20s. I have been through a series of changes. I feel that life does have purpose, that it does have meaning. I don't think we're here by accident. I don't believe that death is the end. I think we are incarnated in physical bodies, but I think consciousness and the body are separate issues. I think life goes on. So in that sense, I am a spiritual person rather than necessarily a religious person. I don't follow a particular religious doctrine.
But you do think there's something else at the end?
I do, particularly the notion that the death is not the end, that it's perhaps the beginning of the next great adventure.
Right. Do you believe in dragons? And you were on with Joe Rogan. 27 million people watching, but Joe Rogan recently said he's a dragon believer. He's probably a bit tongue-in-cheek. I kind of thought with dragons, how do we know, right? We know dinosaurs flew around. How do we know none of them breathe fire?
Actually, we don't.
Right, we don't.
We don't.
I'm using the old Graham Hancock
it would be interesting,
technique here.
It would be interesting, though, to find out how that idea passed down to anatomically modern humans and got encoded in language, since the dinosaurs were more than 66 million years ago.
But is it more likely or not that dragons existed, do you think?
I would say it's less likely that they existed, but creatures like dragons certainly did exist. Look at the pterosaurs.
Why has no one from Hollywood just come and thought, you know what, Graham, whether what you're saying is right or not, your mind is so fantastical, your attention to detail is so amazing. Why have they not come to you and said, here's a 7-movie deal, go and do just something completely nuts based on all your theories, thoughts, findings, whatever?
I don't know. Ask them.
Are you available?
I would welcome it. I am being talked to by Hollywood about a couple of different things at the moment. Yeah, but talking with Hollywood about things and actually getting things done are very different.
Well, Keanu Reeves is a friend of yours, right?
Yes, I like.
And he believes completely in what you're doing.
I can't speak for Keanu. I know that he's deeply curious about the past. He and I.
I mean, in a way, you've made me more curious about this kind of stuff, because I like the honesty of saying I don't actually know. Right? If you were saying this with complete self-righteous certainty, that's one thing. If all you're doing is digging, my journalist hat says to me, you know what? Yes. Why isn't that the point of journalism? Isn't it the point of people to actually just challenge every preconceived notion and keep chipping away and make the experts think about these things?
I've never fully understood why this particular 30-year project of mine has attracted so much intense hostility from certain sectors of archaeology, because I'm not saying I've proved anything. I don't claim to have proved anything. I'm saying there are huge numbers of unanswered questions.
You're suggesting things that we ought to find answers to.
For me, it's a black hole in the past, and it's during the Ice Age, and it's an episode that comes to an end around 12,500 years ago.